Imagine being so trapped in pain and depression that you start questioning whether life is worth living. Sarah was a 32-year-old research scientist thriving in her PhD program when her life changed dramatically. A cycling accident left her with a fractured spine, torn tendons, chronic pain, and depression. She described herself as trapped in negative thinking and self criticism. She was stuck in a loop. And then she heard about a clinical trial at Johns Hopkins using psilocybin. Now, that's the same compound found in hallucinogenic mushrooms. She had never touched recreational drugs in her life, but this was different. This was a supervised clinical trial, and she was just desperate at this point. Sarah signed up, and what happened next was nothing short of transformative. In her words, I can unequivocally say that this clinical trial changed my life. Her brain felt quieter, her thinking patterns shifted, and she discovered a sense of peace and connection she hadn't known in years. But now, and this bit is critical, Sarah also makes it very clear that her transformation wasn't due to the psilocybin alone. She received psilocybin plus therapy, and she credits her recovery to both, along with the guides who supported her and the months of integration afterwards. Hello, and welcome back to Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. This is your host, Sabina Brennan, and today I am diving into a topic that has captured headlines, social media feeds, and scientific journals alike. Psilocybin, the psychedelic compound found in magic mushrooms. I'm exploring what psilocybin is, what the science says, and why the hype online doesn't always match reality. So, okay, bit of context, bit of history. What exactly is psilocybin? Well, it's the active psychedelic compound found in certain mushrooms that have been used for thousands of years in Central and South American rituals. The Aztecs even called them Hannah, I'm going to get this right. I worked on this. Teonanacati. Teonanacati. Anyway, that translates to divine mushroom. In the 1950s, scientists in the West isolated psilocybin, and by the 1960s, it was being tested in psychiatry for alcoholism and for depression. But the explosion of recreational use blurred the line between therapy and party drug. And by the end of that decade, research was shut down. Fast forward to today, and we're seeing what's been called a psychedelic renaissance. That kind of sounds really cool, doesn't it? Anyway, research has restarted and hundreds of clinical trials are underway, with psilocybin being trialed for depression, for anxiety, for PTSD, and actually even for addictions. The headlines make it sound like a miracle drug, but is it? Let's take a look at the evidence, the scientific evidence. First, the early trials. In 2016, researchers at Imperial College London gave psilocybin to 12 people with what's known as treatment-resistant depression. These were people who had tried everything else and really, nothing was working. After just 2 sessions, their depression scores dropped significantly, and some of the improvements lasted for months. But it was a tiny, open label study, so no placebo, no control group. It was exciting, but far from conclusive. A few years later, in 2021, the New England Journal of Medicine published a small but really important trial. This time, psilocybin was compared to escitalopram, a common antidepressant. The results? Both groups improved. Psilocybin wasn't clearly better, but it did work more quickly. Then came the big one, the big study. In 2022, a phase 2 trial called Compass, COMPASS, enrolled more than 200 people across Europe and North America. Participants with treatment-resistant depression were randomized to receive either 25 milligrams, 10 milligrams, or a barely active 1 milligram dose of synthetic psilocybin. At 3 weeks, the high-dose group showed a meaningful reduction in symptoms compared to the very low-dose group. Some actually went into remission. But here's the nuance. By 12 weeks, many had relapsed. So what's the message? What do you take from that? Psilocybin shows promise, but it's not a magic wand. I'm curious to know what neuroscience can tell us about how psilocybin works. What's the mechanism? So the neuroscience research suggests that psilocybin resets the brain. It seems to disrupt rigid, overconnected networks that keep people stuck in rumination and negative thought loops, and it allows new connections to form. So think of it like rebooting a frozen computer, but it really does make sense, because the problem with depression is this rumination, this just caught in a loop. If we go back to Susan at the start of the episode, she was just trapped in this loop. So if it allows us to reset that and actually allows for new connections and new learning to occur, that offers a space, a way in for therapy to actually start working to create new, healthier thought patterns. Other research hints that psilocybin may increase neuroplasticity, so helping the brain to learn and lay down new patterns of thought. And more recently, animal studies suggest it might also dampen inflammation in the brain, linking the immune system to mental health. While clinical trials are cautiously optimistic, outside the lab a very different story is unfolding. And I really want to talk about this because commercial retreats are springing up worldwide, marketing psilocybin as a gateway to enlightenment, to personal transformation, even to career success. A 2025 analysis in PLOS ONE, a prestigious journal, looked at nearly 300 organisations advertising psychedelic retreats online. And I know of someone personally who went on one of these retreats. Many promised life-changing results in just one weekend. I think my friend was actually promised something like that. It had no impact on her. I don't know the details, but possibly, very low dose. What was often missing from these reports were details about the dosage, about the therapist training, about screening for vulnerabilities in individuals that they were involving in, giving them psychedelic medication. No details were given in these reports about integration support afterwards, which we learned at the outset is an important part of a successful process. And then there's social media. Influencers promote psilocybin as a shortcut to productivity or to healing, with posts online claiming things like "one trip cured my depression forever" or "microdosing unlocked my creativity." It's very seductive, and particularly to those who are vulnerable and those who are desperate, but it is dangerously simplistic. Here's my concerns. First, dose and quality. Mushrooms vary enormously in potency, and without regulation, people may take much more or much less than they realize. Second, the absence of preparation, therapy, and integration. In every clinical trial, psilocybin is paired with weeks of preparation and with months of follow-up therapy. The drug alone isn't the cure, it's a catalyst. It facilitates change. How to change comes from the therapy. Remove the therapy and benefits, if any, are far less certain. So third, patient suitability. Clinical trials very carefully exclude people at risk. Third, patient suitability. Clinical trials carefully exclude people at risk of psychosis, schizophrenia, or certain psychiatric conditions. Without that screening, vulnerable people are really at risk of serious harm. And finally, the other thing that concerns me is expectations. Overselling psilocybin as an overnight miracle sets people up for disappointment, or worse, encourages them to abandon treatments we already know work. Psilocybin is promising, yes, but outside carefully controlled trials, the hype is running far ahead of the science. So what should you take away from this episode? Well, let me break it down into tools in 3. 1, question the hype. If you see a headline that says 1 mushroom trip cures depression, remember, these trials are small, carefully controlled, and always combined with therapy. 2, context is everything. A person's mindset, the environment, and professional therapeutic support are as important as the drug itself. And 3, respect the risks. Psilocybin can bring profound insights, but it can also trigger panic, paranoia, or psychosis in vulnerable people. This is not something to try casually or to buy from an ad online. Coming back to Sarah's story, what helped her wasn't just the psilocybin. It was psilocybin in the context of a safe clinical trial at a reputable institution with guides she trusted and months of integration therapy afterwards. That combination gave her a sense of connection and hope that had been missing since her cycling accident. Compare that with the online hype, where psilocybin is sometimes promoted as an instant cure or a productivity hack. The reality is far more complex. Psilocybin is promising, yes, absolutely, but the science is still in its early days. For me, what is fascinating is that psilocybin doesn't so much fix the brain as open a window that loosens rigid patterns, creating an opportunity for change, a way to harness neuroplasticity, to rewire and to become unstuck. What happens in that window, what we do with that window of opportunity, depends on us, on our therapists, on our environment, the work that we are willing to do, and the stories that we choose to tell ourselves. And that brings me full circle to something I talk about in my book, The Neuroscience of Manifesting. Imagination and brain plasticity are powerful tools for reshaping our lives. Psilocybin may open the door, but it's what we do when the door is open that truly matters. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time on Super Brain, where I will be exploring the idea of being kind to yourself, of self-compassion, of loving yourself. Take care, be kind to others, and most importantly, be kind to yourself.